Remember when Zsa Zsa Gabor fell in love with a man on a movie screen and made him her third husband? I do. The first time Zsa Zsa laid eyes on George Sanders was while she was pregnant with Francesca on the verge of divorce and sitting in a movie theater watching The Moon and Sixpence. Now, George was born on July 3rd, 1906 in St. Petersburg, Russia. As the Russian Revolution broke out in 1917, his family decided to move to England, where he went on to study textiles. But it was a job in advertising that would set him down the path that would lead him to Zsa Zsa Gabor. As most stories go, George started out on a stage in a production in Ballyhoo, which led him to crossing the Atlantic to appear on Broadway. 20th Century Fox brought him out west, where they cast him in Lloyd's of London and signed him on to a 7-year contract. But then the United Artists bored him for their 1942 film, The Moon and Sixpence, a film that would see a re-release a few years later, which is when a pregnant Zsa Zsa Gabor saw his face on the silver screen and decided that she was gonna marry him. 6 weeks after giving birth to Francesca, Zsa Zsa found herself at a cocktail party at the St. Regis Hotel. It was there that she spotted George Sanders across the crowded room. She approached him, shaking with nerves, and said, "Mr. Sanders, I'm madly in love with you." George replied, "How very well I understand you." George was technically still married to Susan Larson when he met Zsa Zsa, but apparently was bouncing between multiple women, including Dolores Del Rio and Jean Tierney. He added Zsa Zsa to his roster that night. 43-year-old George married 32-year-old Zsa Zsa on April 1st, 1949 in Las Vegas at a small chapel. They spent their wedding night playing chess after George declared, "I don't know if I can ever make love to you again. Yesterday you were the glamorous Mrs. Conrad Hilton. Now you are just plain Mrs. George Sanders." What a romantic. Zsa Zsa said that many believed the Gabor sisters to be gold diggers who only went after the wealthiest of men. But George wasn't wealthy, and what money he had, he was stingy with. That's what Zsa Zsa gave up Conrad's alimony for. While their relationship may have started out somewhat like a romantic movie, by the time they made it to their belated honeymoon, it was turning into something more Hitchcockian. The couple went to Mallorca while George was filming his movie Blackjack. It was there that Zsa Zsa learned about her third husband's jealous side. Zsa Zsa had a toothache, and George had asked a young man that they had befriended, Jose, to take her to the dentist. She had an impacted wisdom tooth that needed to go. On the way home, Jose's car broke down. George drove by them, but instead of stopping to help, he simply waved. By the time Zsa Zsa got back to their hotel, George was convinced that she had slept with Jose. The accusation was absurd, but the two fought for hours before he grabbed her by the collar of her Balenciaga dress and then, according to Zsa Zsa, dangled her out of the window. She told him he better pull her back in the room before he got himself locked up in Sing Sing. What's that old saying? If you can't trust, you can't be trusted. While Zsa Zsa had remained faithful to George, he had a tendency to stray and had done so with the one and only Marilyn Monroe. He regaled Zsa Zsa with the tale and, of course, had zero shame about it while she cried. In turn, Zsa Zsa was not a fan of the blonde bombshell and was none too pleased when George landed a role in All About Eve with Bette Davis and Marilyn Monroe. Zsa Zsa didn't appreciate watching the actress flirt with her husband, but the film did win him an Academy Award. As we know, Zsa Zsa always wanted more in life, and when she landed in Hollywood, she had her sights set on Tinseltown. George, however, wanted a housewife, someone to fetch his slippers. He made this very clear when one of their friends suggested that George get Zsa Zsa on one of those new TV talk shows. She'd soon become a star. "She's too stupid," George spat. "She'd never make it." Unfortunately for George, he had two people in his life who were fueled by spite: his wife and his older brother. Thomas Sanders, better known as Tom Conway, was a successful actor in his own right. Even though his younger brother had helped get him to Hollywood, Tom was still jealous of George's success and liked sticking it to him when he could. And so he invited Zsa Zsa to be a guest on Bachelor's Heaven, the TV pilot he was hosting. She was an instant hit, answering questions with her quick wit, proving that she was far from her husband's accusation that she was stupid. Within a month of her appearance, she was offered a contract at MGM. While George was in London working on a project, Zsa Zsa landed her first film role in Lovely to Look At. They offered her $10,000 a week. That would be around $121,000 today, a far cry from George's first movie paycheck of $250. More money and more opportunity would come as Zsa Zsa continued to land more roles, including a recurring appearance on Bachelor's Haven, which would earn her an Emmy nomination for Most Outstanding Female Personality. She lost to Betty White, but I mean, if you're gonna lose to anyone, it might as well be Betty. The greater her success, the more tense her marriage became. George had once declared that he wouldn't want a wife who was more famous than him, and Zsa Zsa's star was starting to shine quite bright. His jealousy made him stray, and he found himself in the bed of socialite and heiress Doris Duke. While he might not have wanted a wife more famous than him, he sure didn't mind a mistress with a larger bank account. Go figure. Zsa Zsa started to suspect something was awry when they ran into Doris at Ciro's. Oh yes, remember Conrad Hilton? Doris kissed George on both cheeks with a familiarity that unsettled Zsa Zsa. They were just taking the same vocal lessons, George said. So, Zsa Zsa hired a private eye who tracked the pair to a motel in New Jersey. She confronted George about her findings and threatened to have an affair of her own with Porfirio Rubirosa, Doris's ex-husband, knowing that it wouldn't just hurt Doris, but that it would also destroy George. She couldn't do it, though. She just loved the guy too much. The turning point didn't come eventually, though, when Zsa Zsa landed a role in the 1952 film Moulin Rouge. It was filming in London and Paris. She'd have to be away for 6 months. George told her to go on right ahead. Apart from the fact that her husband seemed a little too enthused to be away from her for so long, the film's director John Huston hadn't wanted Zsa Zsa for the part. He didn't like being told what to do, and so he decided that he was going to sleep with her. But Zsa Zsa was too in love with George and refused him. He spent the rest of filming humiliating and tormenting her. By the time she returned home, George had all but abandoned his wife. He left her in Manhattan for New Year's 1953 and again for the New York premiere of her film. When he went to Italy for a project, she had offered to go with him, and he refused. She said that he made himself very clear. He didn't want her to be an actress and would have no part in supporting her new career. She thought about giving it all up for him, but there was no security in his love for her. How could she throw it all away when she knew that he had a tendency to wander? If she gave it all up for him and then he gave up on her, where would she be? What would she have? But instead, she chose herself and what she wanted, and that landed her many opportunities, including appearances at Las Vegas nightclubs. She made $35,000 a week appearing at the Flamingo. That would be around $422,000 today. Definitely worth more than an unsupportive, philandering husband. Well, she'd spent the bulk of her marriage resounding her love for George. Eventually, that did waver. First with Lil Nicky Hilton. He had married the star with the violet eyes, Elizabeth Taylor, in 1950. While Conrad Sr. was delighted with their union, it was tumultuous at best. And yes, I have done a video on that. Nicky was miserable in his marriage, and Zsa Zsa was miserable in hers. So when he showed up at her home at 938 Bel Air Road, the pair aired their grievances to each other before seeking solace in bed. It'd be the last time she would indulge with Nicky, but Elizabeth would stay on her radar as George had revealed that while filming Ivanhoe with Liz, he'd been playing cards at their hotel with a bunch of English actors. Liz allegedly burst into the room in a translucent nightgown and said, "Which one of you am I gonna sleep with tonight?" She picked Michael Wilding, who would become her second husband. There's a video on them too. It would be during that fateful trip to New York for her movie premiere that would ultimately end her marriage to George. It was in an elevator at the Plaza, yes, the hotel that her second husband, Conrad Hilton, owned, that Zsa Zsa ran into the Porfirio Rubirosa, whom she referred to as Ruby. Ruby was married at the time there. That didn't stop him from spending a night with Zsa Zsa at the Plaza, though. Zsa Zsa continued her affair with Ruby across Europe. He wanted her to divorce George and marry him, but she, for some reason, still loved George, and even though he wasn't outwardly fighting for her, she believed that he did want her back. She was torn between the two even after Ruby slapped her so hard one night he made her nose bleed. She returned to LA, where the world was well aware of her affair. George was unbothered, saying, "Darling, sexual passion lasts only 2 years. You'll be back with Daddy." He told her that he forgave her for the affair because she always made him laugh. What a funny little gal. She was convinced that despite both of their infidelity, they'd stay married forever. Apparently, she didn't make George laugh hard enough, though, because he filed for divorce towards the end of 1953. And Ruby, well, he decided to marry Barbara Hutton instead, making him the 5th husband out of the 7 for the socialite. Zsa Zsa and George divorced in April 1954. 2 years later, they starred together in Death of a Scoundrel. He married actress Benita Hume in 1959, but she passed away from cancer in 1967, the same year that his brother Tom passed away from liver failure. Things went downhill for him after that. He lost millions in a failed investment and suffered a mini-stroke, which drove him into a further depression. Zsa Zsa had stayed close to George and had encouraged him to marry her sister Magda, who had also suffered a debilitating stroke. I mean, I guess that's something to have in common. Their marriage lasted less than a month and was annulled with George claiming impotence. Unsurprisingly, communication was difficult for the two after each had a stroke. Eventually, life got too heavy for George, and on April 25, 1972, he passed away from cardiac arrest after attempting to take his own life. He had left behind a note saying, "I am leaving because I am bored. I feel I have lived long enough. I am leaving you with your worries in this sweet cesspool. Good luck." He was 65 years old. Zsa Zsa claimed that they were lovers until the very end. Third time wasn't the charm for Zsa Zsa, but maybe 4 was her lucky number? Stay tuned to find out. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you liked this one. If you did, please save it and share with your friends. It really does help spread the good word of the cult. And don't forget to follow me over on the gram and the Tube of the U, just in case, especially if you're having trouble on this app. Good day, and may the cult be with you.